While most series may be known for their main characters and heroes of the story, Far Cry is certainly not one of those series. The antagonists of the Far Cry series have always been way more memorable and important in the Far Cry games, and usually occupy the huge spot on the front of the cover. Ever since Far Cry 3 really, there's always been one big main villain, and the one everybody will associate with that game. Far Cry 3 being Vaas, Far Cry 4 being Pagan, Far Cry 5 being Joseph, and just recently Far Cry 6 being Anton. Not all the games in the series are like this though. There's more obscure and mysterious villains like the Jackal from Far Cry 2, or the duo of Ull and Batari from Far Cry Primal. So today we're going to be ranking all the main villains of the Far Cry series, just like we did with the Far Cry open worlds and the protagonists. Keep in mind this ranking is my opinion, so feel free to leave your rankings down in the comments. Starting at last place at number 8, we have Dr. Krieger from Far Cry 1. If you've played the original Far Cry, I think it's quite obvious why Krieger is at the bottom. First of all, he's hardly in this game really. He has a very small handful of cutscenes, but he's probably the closest to a main antagonist the game has. He has no backstory, his motives are extremely vague, there's no incredible standout performances or lines that stand out from him for me. He's very generic and forgettable, especially when compared to many other antagonists of this series. At number 7, we have Ull and Batari from Far Cry Primal. There's a pretty similar reasoning behind this one as well. Are Ull and Batari intimidating? Sure. Do they have any substance as far as villains go? A little, yes. Definitely more than Krieger, but overall not a lot. It is a little odd that they decide to go for different kinds of villains for Primal. Like I said recently, most Far Cry games have a big villain present in the game that drives the plot, but in Primal they opted for two villains, both of which having smaller roles than antagonists usually would in a Far Cry game. Ull and Batari aren't that bad though. They have some good moments in Primal, Ull being the leader of the Udam who enforces respect and fear, while Batari is more of a spiritual leader of the Azila tribe where she performs rituals and all that spiritual stuff. You know how it is. Again, both villains don't have nearly as much substance and screen time as your average Far Cry villain, and to be fair, that's intentional. It's just how Far Cry Primal was designed, but that's why these two are towards the bottom of the list. At number 6, we have the twins Mickey and Lou from Far Cry New Dawn. Mickey and Lou certainly have a bigger role as antagonists in New Dawn when compared to Ull and Batari from Primal. The twins even get a little bit of backstory and reasoning for how they ended up the way they are in New Dawn. They're also present for a lot of New Dawn's story. However, I still found Joseph C. to be far more interesting in this game, even if he's not the main antagonist. And generally speaking, I found Mickey and Lou a little boring. They're okay, I suppose, but nowhere near the best of the series in my opinion. Now this one is probably gonna anger some people, and this was a hard decision, but at number 5 is Anton Castillo from Far Cry 6. If you've seen any of my Which Game Is Better videos, or even my review involving Far Cry 6, I've explained it about a dozen times now, but I was disappointed by Anton Castillo. Knowing Giancarlo Esposito was going to be playing the villain had me really excited. I mean, I loved him as Gus Fring, and don't get me wrong, his performance here is still great. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is I found Anton to be surprisingly generic for such a big villain. First of all, he's not in the game much, and he interacts with the main character Danny in like 2 or 3 scenes in the entire game, and it feels like every scene he is in is just him giving his evil monologues. I wanted more from Anton, and I've said this a lot. They touched on his backstory very briefly, as he explained that his father, who was once president, was killed in the revolution of 1967, and that Anton was essentially in the exact same situation at the time as his son Diego, but they didn't go much further than that. Anton's whole motivation is he wants to bring Yara wealth once again by selling a very vague cancer-curing drug called Viviro, but his methods like slavery is what makes him the target of the Resistance Libertad. It's just a story I feel like I've seen 100 times. In fact, that idea of the tyrant versus resistance is also part of Far Cry 4, but despite that, even if we got more insight into Anton and more understanding of his character, and if he was more present in the game and with the main character Danny, I would have found him a lot more enjoyable. I do think his relationship with his son Diego is interesting, but for me it's just not enough. I know some people really like Anton, and I think he had so much potential, but overall he left me disappointed. I wanted so much more from him. At number 4 is Far Cry 2's mysterious antagonist, the Jackal. The Jackal is such a unique antagonist for the series, and he perfectly fits that weird but intriguing plot of Far Cry 2. What I love so much about the Jackal is that mystery and trying to figure out if he's actually even a villain. His character lies completely in that moral gray area, as he's dealing weapons to both sides of the conflict, while in the process also trying to eliminate both and bring the country out of a war. Your entire goal in this game is to kill the Jackal, but you'll soon realize nothing about this guy is simple, and there's much more to him than meets the eye. The Jackal is such a unique antagonist and stands out from so many of the series' antagonists. We also finally got confirmation recently from the Far Cry 2 developers that the Jackal is actually Jack Carver, the main character from the first Far Cry game, which makes everything about him way more interesting. What happened to Jack over the years, and what developed him from this generic classic hero from Far Cry 1 into this mysterious, morally questionable antagonist in Far Cry 2. Such a fascinating and underrated character in the series. Getting into the top 3, we are talking about the best of the best, starting with the Far Cry 5 antagonist, Joseph Seed. Joseph Seed is a villain I've changed my mind a lot about, but I always considered him to be among the best in the series for multiple reasons. Firstly, I do like how a big theme of Far Cry 5 is religion, and Joseph being a big part of that with his cult of followers and believers. Usually we associate faith as something positive, which already has us thinking Joseph may not be such a bad guy. What he wants is very good, in fact, and whether or not the ways and methods he uses to obtain it are good is left more to your own interpretation. But the way I see it, the main character, the deputy, feels more in the wrong than Joseph, as he kills whoever gets in his way and causes chaos and destruction wherever he goes. Joseph is just trying to carry out God's will and do what he thinks is right, and perhaps he goes too far and loses his way, but either way, you never get the feeling that Joseph is your standard villain. He has layers and dimensions, there's a lot more to him, and he still has people he cares about with his siblings, and Faith, who is almost like a daughter or little sister to him. He saved her life and gave her purpose, as he did for many people. Not to mention, Joseph has some great moments and an excellent performance in the game. I remember the first time I saw that introduction to Far Cry 5 with arresting Joseph and the helicopter. It gave me chills. The dude is scary and intimidating while still having moments of feeling likable. And even though the ending to Far Cry 5 is very controversial, I still like that it gives off the feeling that Joseph was actually right all along, and that maybe you were the villain of this story, or there is no villain at all. It's a really cool twist on the hero versus villain conflict we're so used to, and no matter which way you look at it, Joseph is a very layered character. I also really enjoyed his role in Far Cry New Dawn, and how he's developed and changed since the ending of Far Cry 5, and how he reflects upon his actions with regret and remorse. Joseph is a very deep and complex character, and I can't wait to see him again in the Far Cry 6 DLC, Joseph Collapse. At number 2, we have the main man himself, Pagan Min from Far Cry 4. I've always loved Pagan Min. He's got that fun, extravagant personality. He's very charismatic and likable. In fact, I think Pagan Min is far more likable than any character from the Golden Path, like Ajay, Amida, and Sabal. I always found Pagan to be a far better ruler than any of them, even if he is a little extreme sometimes, but that's kind of the theme of Far Cry 4. It's about choosing the lesser of two evils. Pagan fits that theme perfectly, and similar to Joseph, you never really feel like he's super evil. Sure, he has his moments where he loses control and may appear to be a little psychotic, but then you discover more about his relationship with the main character Ajay's mom, Ishwari, how they had a daughter, Lakshmana, and how Pagan sees Ajay as like an adopted son. Pagan wants to do right by Ajay and give him the throne of Kyrat, as Pagan had grown tired of it as he became very lonely, which is what he would have told you, Ajay, if you hadn't been so rude and left the dinner table without being excused. And of course, just recently we had the Pagan Control DLC for Far Cry 6, which fleshed out Pagan a lot more as a character and made his motives and desires more known. All Pagan truly wanted was a family. Him, Ishwari, Ajay, and Lakshmana, all together as a happy family is all he wanted. But then, you know, that scumbag Mohan killed his daughter, which threw Pagan into despair and led him to falling more into the darkness as he became a more ruthless king king wanting to destroy the golden path. There was always that part or side to Pagan that wanted to have it all: wealth, respect, and power. The tyrant. And the tyrant often got the better of him after the death of his daughter and the arrival of Ajay. But you can tell he still wanted that family. He still wanted people who cared about him. I talk about this a lot more in depth with my video about the DLC, but essentially it made Pagan even more fleshed out and likable than before, which is exactly what I wanted from it. And the DLC further solidifies why Pagan is one of my favorite antagonists, not only in Far Cry, but in video games. I even considered putting him at number 1. But number 1, while I do really love Pagan, this top spot and the best villain of the Far Cry series has to go to Vas Montenegro from Far Cry 3. Where to even begin? How about his fantastic performance by Michael Mando? How about his iconic definition of insanity scene? There's no way you can play Far Cry 3 and forget these scenes with Vas. They're chilling and draw you in nearly every time. His scenes with Jason Brody and the mirroring of the two characters is smart and brilliant on the writer's part. The fact that Vas is going insane because he just can't kill Jason no matter how many times he tries. Honestly, the biggest crime of Far Cry 3 is how short-lived Vas is. He's only in the first half of the game, and because his appearances are so limited, we don't get a ton of backstory or depth for the character, but that's where the Vas Insanity DLC from Far Cry 6 comes in and delivers all that. In that DLC, we get more insight into Vas's backstory, what he was going through leading up to him first meeting Jason in Far Cry 3, the struggles and mental issues he was dealing with, and the absolute abuse he was going through emotionally from his sister Citra, who was manipulating and bewildering of Vas. She was seducing him with the idea of being her special warrior, just like she did to Jason Brody, and it shows that Jason and Vas are essentially the same, and both were competing to become Citra's warrior, the only difference being Vas stayed true to himself, while Jason lost himself. The DLC also shows that Vas was constantly on drugs and how his mental stability was completely thrown out the window. Isn't it amazing that they were able to make us feel sympathetic for Vas? They were able to make us empathize with a psychotic killer. That's great writing and a great villain. I know Vas gets hyped up a lot and talked about a lot in the Far Cry community, but it's more than well deserved, and while I love some of the other villains on this list, especially Pagan, number 1 just has to be Vas. But let me know in the comments who you guys think the best villain in the Far Cry series is and why, and feel free to leave your ranking of the antagonists as well. If you enjoyed the video, I've made 2 other ranking videos for Far Cry, one for the open worlds and another for the protagonists. I'll leave links in the description for those if you want to check them out, and also consider checking out my videos on the Vas and Pagan DLCs for Far Cry 6. If you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel. It would really help me out, and other than that, thanks for watching and have a good day, everyone.